It's Friday, January the 10th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Today on the show, the love of music and why it's important to keep ensemble performances alive, live, and thriving. I've got some music lovers who have some thoughts and passion on this, so stay tuned. Get it? All right, we're going to start with, instead of starting with talking, I'll be quiet now and we'll just hit play on that, Nate, if you could, please. So for my guests in the studio, as we keep the music playing, what are you feeling when you're listening? I'll introduce you in a second. Bear with me. I'm just curious. What are you feeling when you're listening to this?
I mean, I'm just dancing around.
There you go.
It's a bop.
It's a bop.
Definitely dancing. Yeah.
Dancing.
For sure.
Exciting, yeah.
Yeah, exciting. And just the power of so many voices doing something in sync, right? Like that's what I'm getting from this.
All right, and then what are you picturing?
I mean, this is all heavy metal to me.
Yeah.
Except there's like 50 people on stage playing it at once.
There we go. So 50 people on the stage playing it. So paint that picture for me then, if you could. Continue to paint the picture for me.
Well, 50 students who worked their butt off for a whole semester to play a pretty hard piece of music on our first concert of last year, which was my first concert at MUN completely. And 50 students who were also kind of worried about it, but also pulled it off to great success. And we were all kind of giving our all in that performance. It
sounds great. No, I'm just an amateur listener person. I crashed out of music after Hot Cross Buns with the recorder in primary school, but the ears can appreciate it, even though the rest of me couldn't produce it. Dylan, introduce yourself if you could.
Well, my name's Dylan Maddix. I'm assistant professor of, get ready for this title, instrumental conducting, community engagement, and the director of the MUN Wind Ensemble here in St. John's.
Excellent. Yeah, I don't think all of that made it to the show notes for YouTube today, but I think I was like instrumental conductor. But welcome, thanks for coming in. We've got Florian Hoefner here as well. So we've got a full house here, folks. 4 people. So I'm looking all over the place, and Dylan and Florian are sitting across from each other. You had the show idea for this, right? You get me and you talked. I said I'm open for anything, which is what I tell guests who come here. And then you got back in touch. And what was the idea behind the show for today?
Well, I was here about a year ago, and we had this lovely show. It was just before the Junos, and the Swinging Bells were in here, and we got into talking about the importance of music making, especially in the school system. And so I thought it'd be nice to have a follow-up conversation about this and maybe expand this to what it means to play in an ensemble, especially in a large ensemble, right? So beyond the individual music making, what is it that's so important and exciting about making music in a group, in a large group together?
So I've got you down. I mean, you're professor assistant at MUN, Memorial University's music department. You're a jazz musician. What's your full title, by the way?
Assistant professor of jazz studies.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I almost had it. That's great. Yeah. Good. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you had more. Susan Evoy is here, music teacher at Waterford Valley High and St. Teresa's Elementary. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks.
How long have you been a music teacher for?
Since 2004.
What's changed over that time?
Many things, for better and for worse.
Yeah.
I find schools are recognizing the importance of music programs, even though a lot of schools are finding their music time cut. But I know that administrators that I have had have really begun to value more how important the music ensembles are. I would say COVID kind of knocked down a lot of programs, and I know a lot of music educators in the public system are all in a build back scenario right now. However, I find the students are very eager to also build back. So we might not be where we were skill level wise, where most students are maybe when they get to high school and when they get to junior high, but the students are still very enthusiastic about it.
And we've also got Jo Dashney here, music and performer, also music student, plays the trombone in the ensemble. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I was on that recording there. I had a great time on stage.
Question for you. How long does it take to prepare for something like that?
Well, I hate to say it, but it really depends on the context. For that concert, getting 50 students together, it really takes the whole semester.
Yeah, 50 students.
50 students, and all at different levels of playing, different levels of preparation, and coming together to make it happen. It does take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and it helps to have such a supportive person to help us along the way and create a really supportive environment for us to work together.
What's then the range of feeling for when you have a big project like that, 50 students trying to tackle varying levels of ability, trying to kind of row in the same direction to produce what we just heard there. From when you first get the sheet music and the discussion to working your way through it, what's the range of emotions when it comes to this, or what can they be?
So really, the main thing is I'm just so excited to get started, excited to play this music with all my friends, all my colleagues. There's a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of pressure, especially when you're on stage. You see those bright lights on you, very warm. Everyone's wearing black. It can tend to be a little bit on the formal side of things for a school concert. So there is a little bit of extra anxiety, but really everyone is just so excited. So that helps us feel like there's a lot of energy within us, and channeling that into the excitement of playing together, it helps a lot.
What's it like for you, Dylan, to kind of bring folks together and to see it like the first rehearsal and to be like, okay, so I've got some notes, and then to the end bit?
I mean, it's perfect timing for this because that's what we had this week being back at school, and some glorious and not so glorious sounds come out of instruments. But I'm always trying to see what can be and not what is. Yeah. So it's just seeing the potential of the ensemble like this semester is super exciting. In the context of the recording that you heard, we started early September. We gave that concert maybe mid-October, late October last year. And I had a lot of anxiety just because it was my first concert at MUN.
Yeah.
And they had a lot of anxiety because they weren't used to preparing a program that quickly. But because of, certain degrees of pressure, but also support, not only from myself, but also from each other, we're able to reach really high levels. And if I can actually use Jo as an example, the MUN Wind Ensemble and the Jazz Orchestra and the orchestra is in a unique position in the country where our ensembles are made up of not only undergraduate students, but also graduate students, so people who already have music degrees. And you would think that kind of space of skill level and experience is often hard to kind of balance, but it actually, in Jo's case, Jo really acts as a leader within in their section. And even when I'm rehearsing with the flutes, Jo can be working with the trombones at the same time. And that happens within every section. So there's this really beautiful community of mentorship and support that happens within ensemble that you wouldn't necessarily get, if you were just by yourself.
How do you work? I understand a little bit about anxiety. Like when I first started this, like one time on the show when I first started, the board the control board out there, me and my technical terms here, it froze when the show just started, and it was just dead. Like, so I had no one on the phone, no one in the studio. They couldn't play a song, and they're like, Adam, you just gotta. And I was like, and I so I blacked out for 2 minutes, and I still don't know what I said, and I refuse to go back and listen to it. So I do know a little bit about anxiety. How do you work through when it comes to that, like your first time with all those students, or when it's your like you can be more seasoned and helping folks, but some anxiety, or those first ones of teaching, talking to students, and kind of working through it. What's the anxiety bit like in your world?
Oof. Well, I think for us, it's just because it's a public art. If you paint a painting, you get to put it up on a wall, and that is nerve-wracking too. But you don't have to recreate it every single time. Yeah, you're
not painting in public every day, and everyone's like, "No, actually, I don't like that tint," or "You used a different one last time." Yeah. And thanks for I love emails, folks. thesignal@cbc.ca.
Yeah. And at least within Jo and I's case, we're both brass players, so when we mess up, you hear it.
It's so obvious. Yeah, there's no hiding that. For sure.
So a lot of that fear of failure comes in into what builds a lot of that anxiety. So we have a lot of discussions in rehearsal about just stuff beyond music. Like, what is failure? What is it to go through failure? Do we need to experience it? Why is it important? Things that go beyond music, and we can talk about how we can improve as people, and how the things we learn in ensembles can also help us through the various challenges and problems we find in life.
See, I love it when my guests fulfill some of the promises I make in the beginning, like in the show intro right away. Like, yes, tell me more about the music benefit of life, which is the point of the show, right? Mm-hmm. Like, we're talking about community, we're talking about what music does, the importance of ensemble performances, the value that they have in schools and for people, not just in this province, around the world. So for Florian, if we're going to talk about anxiety, what about your thoughts on it and working through it, and just to build on what's been said here?
Yeah, I'm sort of lucky that I don't struggle with anxiety a lot myself.
Oh, Mr. Steel Nerves.
My wife comments on that as well, but there's still situations where especially high stakes performances where you do feel nerves a little bit, and I definitely remember it from being a student as well. I used to be a trumpet player as well, and one thing that always happened, like your mouth just gets super dry when you get when you get nervous about something, right? And then like nothing works anymore. So I used to chug lots of water during performances or auditions and this sort of stuff. So that's sort of my past. These days, there's lots of strategies you can use to overcome anxiety. And my wife, Christine Carter, she's an expert on this. So I've learned a lot from her in this regard. She teaches a course right now on at MUN exactly about this topic. There's things you can do, sort of having a highlight reel in your head of past successes of moments you felt really proud of as a musician, and so you can go through that, which then takes your mind off of all of the fears you may have about what's ahead of you in terms of the performance, right? So there's a few things you can do like that, and obviously it's a bit deeper than what I just said, but that's just one example of.
Well, and again, like when we're talking about the benefit of music, and because life, I don't know if you noticed, but there's a lot of anxiety in life, right? I mean, maybe not for Florian, but for everyone else, like there's lots of anxiety and ways to cope and process that, right? Like it's not to be too hitting people over the head with it today, but it's just, I find it interesting. I've mentioned this on the show before. When I was in the reserves, a buddy of mine had so if we're talking about like the highlight reel in his wallet, he had this is we're like talking like 1999, year 2000. He had a laminated rectangle with a list of his accomplishments. So anytime he thought he couldn't do it, he would take it out of his wallet and look at it and feel better about himself. So, highlight reel. Susan, with students, what about like for young, because if we're talking Waterford Valley High, St. Teresa's Elementary, or other students you've worked with over the years, school can be an anxious place. Life, there's lots of anxiety. How do you help students when they're learning and figuring stuff out with music, but then also how that translates in life?
I think it's really funny, especially for my younger musicians at the elementary school. I said, we're going to do a concert. We're going to do a concert at 7 p.m. And they said, at night? We got to come to school at night?
Like, no, the other 7 p.m.
Yeah, so like, I think just for my young musicians, getting them used to like, we're going to do this thing that is hard and we don't know how to do it yet. But then when they see how far they've come and they get up there in the gymnasium and everybody wants them to succeed, all their families and nannies and poppies and everyone is there. And there's probably babies crawling around the floor and they do it and they're very professional. They sit in their playing position and then they go and they say, wow, she's using the stick. So when I take out the baton instead of just using my hands. And they're so impressive. They really impress their families with how far they have come since the hot cross buns, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
Usually our big finale in December. And even my more mature musicians that I teach at the high school, we start challenging music. And especially now, we have lots of smaller groups. So everybody has to be very accountable for their own part. You got to show up. You got to be ready. Because if you don't know your part, then it's going to kind of ruin it for everybody else. So I think it's just the students are learning not only to like be prepared, be accountable, but they're learning that they can depend on one another and support each other. And even in the elementary school, like if somebody's bow breaks or something fixes, they're all very eager to jump in and help one another. So we're having that empathy side of it, we're having that teamwork side of it, and working together. It is really, really one of the most rewarding parts of it.
And what's it like when it's either you yourself, when you discovered it, or when you see students really connect to a piece of music?
Well, Well, if I can tell a quick story.
Yeah, I love stories. We look, it's a 55-minute show. Anecdotes I'm all about anecdotes and stories.
Well, this one will be 40 minutes.
Yeah, and I'm like, boy, did I regret asking that.
No, I think that moment for me as a student happened. We most of us have done band trips as being high school students, and we had a trip to New York once, and we were playing this beautiful piece called O Magnum Mysterium by Morton Lawrenson. And it has
that in New York too.
Yeah,
it's
the place to play it. We were actually in Newark, but for the story, we'll say New York. But we were playing at this festival competition, and we played this piece, and we played it, and I don't really remember much from that. I kind of blacked out. Yeah. But I remember this guy came on stage who was our adjudicator, and I remember not being able to pronounce his name. And he came up, and he ended up working on this piece with us. And it came to that big moment where the cymbal begins to crescendo, everyone's increasing in volume, and then there's that moment that gives grandma chills. And at that moment, he told us to think of someone we love, either who's with us or who's not. So we all took a minute to think about that person, whoever it was. And I thought about my grandma, and we did that same piece of music. Nothing's changed except our thought. And we did it again, and the whole band was bawling. Our conductor, Mark Ramsey, who's now Dr. Mark Ramsey, teaches at Western, he was bawling. The adjudicator was bawling. The audience was bawling. And for the first time in my little high school life, grade 10, I discovered why music, how I can connect life, what's going on here in my head and my heart, and express it through my instrument. And since that point, because this is the topic of the show, that's why I scream from the rafters about how important this is in a world where there's so much going on and we don't know how to communicate. There's this universal language, as they say, that does that. So for me, that's what it can be and why it's so important for me.
Yeah, I love the comment on the togetherness of it. Yesterday we did this show on the defining moments of the of this century, right, the 21st century, and not all defining moments are great moments. A lot of them have to do with some pretty horrible, horrifying things that separate people. But then thinking about this show all week, right? I've been doing politics all week. And thinking about some of the points in the chat notes that Lazarenko was putting together from talking to you all, that was one of the things that really attracted me to this. I've always wanted to have this conversation, but this specific point that you just made is one of the big attraction points for me, right? Of this thing of like in a world that can be so separate and apart and divisive, when you have something of this common language to bring people together, it's really beautiful. Yep. Anyone else on connection to music? Thoughts?
Yeah. If you think about sort of the primal function of music in early tribal human life, experts today think that music may have been there before language, and one of the prime functions is social bonding in a group, and it has been that since 10,000s of years. So I think that is still there when we get together today and we play music in an ensemble as a group. And then the other aspect I think that Dylan's story illustrates so beautifully is that with music we're able to express very complex emotional situations in a very natural way.
Yeah.
That you couldn't necessarily do with language, right? It's this abstract form of communicating complex emotional thoughts. And you can't do that with language in the same way.
And just the feeling you can get. And I mean, if you're listening to like, I don't know, Vivaldi or something, right? But, it's just to pick one. It just the feeling that's there. And then if you layer that with a time, place, moment where you were, or even just looking at the weather, it's an augmented reality of some sort, right?
Yes.
So then with all this that we're saying, right, what, and we started, Susan, when you mentioned, just where things are at with music in Newfoundland and Labrador, and shrinking hours perhaps, what needs to be done to shore up to whether it's the rebound from the damage or the dents or whatever you want to call it from the pandemic years, what needs to be done to get things to grow further and to improve where we are with music teaching and learning and all of that in this province, whether it's in the school system or in post-secondary, if anyone has any thoughts.
A big question. I think even our discussion today is part of the beginning of it. Just the idea of advocating and talking about what's important, why is it important, especially, and I won't speak for Susan, who teaches in the public school system, but the focus on sciences and the idea that music learning is just something extra. It's just a hobby. I think talking about like what music actually is, like if we just had one bar of music and we talked about all of the different areas of the brain that's engaged. When you look at one bar of music, you have a time signature, so you have to think about time. There's a note. That note also tells you the length of a note. It tells you the pitch of a note. And there's descriptions and ideas that you have to think artistically of how you're going to play that note. So there's just so many different things that are triggered when students are learning music in a band program or in a music program of any kind. So I think that importance, we always connect, like, if you're a good music student, you're good at math, which I was not.
Noted.
Yeah. Just in case. I got a job now, so we're safe.
We're safe.
It's all,
you're in the clear.
All the truth's coming out. But I think what we should be talking about and what administrators should be aware of is that music is good because it's music and because it holds up by itself. And we have these wonderful byproducts that studies show. But there's a wonderful reason for why we should be fighting for it. And there's, the ways that we go. I just try to tell anyone I know, musical or not, just the importance of it. And they know when they come to concerts and see that too. So I'm currently, my way of trying to improve things is just being loud and proud. Okay. And there's so much nuance, and my answer is not even half of a percentage of the answer, but.
I think it's a great start.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, I think to what Dylan said, it's just important to acknowledge the big benefits that music making has, the advantages of doing it in a large group as well. In a high school, the large group has the benefit that it has a place for really experienced musicians, but also less experienced musicians can be part of it, and they learn so much from their peers, right? As opposed to a small chamber group where you need a certain level for every player in the group for it to work. In a larger ensemble, it's much easier to take along players with less musical experience who had less lessons maybe in their childhood, and so it's a more accessible way to make music. And then the other point I wanted to get at, especially in today's times, I'm a big advocate for a phone-free childhood. So I've done a lot of reading there.
Yeah, and a lot of people are turning the corner on that these days. Yeah.
Yes, and so what happens to kids these days? You think like social media, like they're connected with their friends, but what really happens? They're isolated. They're on their phones. They're online by themselves. And what we noticed too at MUN from student comments, once they step into that band room, they put their devices away, they're offline, they're in the real world, they're interacting with each other, creating something together that still feels real in flesh and blood, and I think that aspect of music is really invaluable, especially in today's environment.
And Susan, what do you notice about that? Whether now, feel free to answer any of the previous question, but and I know there's been a shift with cell phones in schools, obviously this year, the ban that's with the exception of special circumstances. But what have you noticed around that over the last few years of students coming in, no phones, and just being engrossed into a music type setting?
I think, just to touch on what everybody else already said, the end product is greater than all of the individual parts that people are putting in. And just like Florian said, if people, even students who make music like on their phones and stuff, it's in isolation, or it's sometimes a passive thing that they're doing. Whereas when you're involved in a large ensemble, be it instrumental or choir, whatever you're doing, every little part contributes to this beautiful end product, and everybody, like Florian just said, can feel a part of that. Everybody has something to do with it. And I think for a lot of people, if any students have been a part of like a musical in high school, that's one of their defining memories. When they remember high school, when they look back on it, it's like, remember, we were all a part of that show. You're fostering these relationships with people that you may never interact with. They might not be in any of your classes. You might not come across them socially, but in that room, you're all supporting each other. You're looking out for each other. You're working together, and you're creating this beautiful product.
I was in a musical in high school. They did tell me to mouth the words, but
It's okay.
I'll be fine. Yeah. I've mentioned that before the show too. So
That's next week's show.
I'm still working through it. Joe, any thoughts on?
Well, just to talk about musicals, especially, those are some really valuable opportunities because you're telling like a very distinct story, which you are often when you're playing music too. But musicals, like, you know, if you, especially being in the pit, you know what's happening on stage, and you can. It's such a good opportunity to be creative, to be imaginative, and often music can tend to be a little bit academic when we're talking about it in university. Mm-hmm. But having that opportunity to like bring all of those skills, all of the time you spent in the practice room by yourself, and to let that be driven by your creative imagination when you're performing is like, it's a great thing. And that's one thing that helps you get over the anxiety of performing is your imagination. And instead of thinking about, oh, I'm going to press down this key or I'm going to do this, you're thinking about everyone around you. You're thinking about the story that you're telling. And that's an experience that is going to translate into so many wonderful, wonderful artistic experiences for the audience too. And so they'll notice that you have that imagination, and it's really great for students.
I've got another clip to play. Let's give that one a whirl. So that is I know you all know from listening. So, and in case the folks listening out and about haven't clocked it yet, that's a rehearsal, right? So that's a rehearsal at Lewisport High School. It's their ensemble back in December because my colleagues at Weekend AM did some great coverage. It was conducted by Adam Baxter, and I think the stat they mentioned at the time, I think it's like half the school is involved in the ensemble, or in band.
More than half,
or even more than half, right? Like it's like. Yeah, more than half, like, which is a lot, like, and fantastic. So, like, just thoughts on either what you heard or just Adam Baxter, Lewisport High School. Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in because Adam's one of my favorite humans on the planet.
Oh, there you go.
I was able to work with this band last year at the Grand Falls Windsor Kiwanis Music Festival. And basically, Adam's band kept me in business the whole week there because he had jazz bands, he had the numerous band programs there. And it's an amazing thing, that little art center there, that stage completely full of kids who are just giving their all. And to see how much of a magnet Adam is, like those kids would do anything for him.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing thing to see. So, and especially somewhere, I think a lot of when we talk about band programs in Newfoundland and Labrador, St. John's has, just because of population, has a lot of them. But for Adam and Lewisport to be having half or more than half of the school population in the band program, it's a testament to what could be. Yeah. Because there's a lot of, we talk a lot about band programs and what schools can, and a lot of it depends on the context of where you find yourself. If you're in rural Newfoundland, maybe you're not able to have a full band program. But Adam, not that Lewisport's completely rural or anything, but it's really amazing to see what he's done there, and just to hear him rehearsing put a smile on my face.
Yeah, no, everyone here, you're all kind of like bopping with the heads and stuff. Any other thoughts on just whether it's the rehearsal and what goes into it, or I mean, it could be Lewisport specifically or anything?
Yeah, music rehearsal is such a for me, music is one of the areas in my life that when I'm playing, when I'm rehearsing, I find that I can like focus on it more than I can with many other things that I have to focus on. So, and for a lot of younger students, that can be like a big thing as well, especially like elementary school kids. Short attention spans for one or another reasons. But music is such a good way to like focus your energy onto one task that you're doing, and having friends to do it with and having a teacher to guide you through it is so like it's great, and it helps you focus in other areas as well.
What do you think then for these? I'm thinking again with Lewisburg, right? When you got over half of a school in a music program, talk to me a bit more, and we've touched on this already, but just the benefits for these young people and what you think this will give. Because also, to Susan, to your point, go to those kids 20 years from now, I guarantee you, this is like you're saying, that is one of the things that they're going to be talking about forever.
And hopefully you are helping to create lifelong musicians.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to end just because somebody finishes school. I think just listening to that rehearsal, I know that feeling, like kind of yelling out the numbers at people and like screaming at them and now and go, here we go, you play now. And then when they grow as musicians and they're learning that independence, and they don't need you to be yelling out and counting and stuff. And also kind of like the relationships you're fostering with your students when you're talking about, if you have a teacher to guide you, like the private jokes, because everyone knows like, wow, Adam always missed this part. And then in the performance, like, oh God, is he gonna get it? And yay, you got it. So I think just talking about like fostering the relationships between educators, also Adam's program, he's doing great out there. And I think a lot of music educators, especially in the public system, and I know Adam works so hard, because you got to be thinking, if he has all these different ensembles, you don't want to be repeating the same tunes every year. Some students will have aspirations like, maybe if I get really good in my band, I'll get bumped up to like the more advanced bands. So they have like aspirations, they have goals. I think Adam is probably fixing a lot of instruments out there on his own, YouTubing a lot. Adam, I know if you're doing what I'm doing, we're all doing in the same boat there. So I know it's like you wear a lot of hats, and I know especially him out there, he probably doesn't have access to as many resources that we have in town. He's probably like working his butt out there, and I know the students appreciate that, and they see that he's shown up for them, so they're going to show up for him. Really incredible.
You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. Today, we're talking about the love of music, the love of music ensembles, what it provides for young people, what it provides for adults. And if you're out there, and if you're listening to this and you played in band in school, if you're part or are part of a music ensemble, if you have thoughts for us, the text line is open, 709-327-8206. You can email us, thesignal@cbc.ca. Because my question for you, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? What did it mean to you if you have those memories? And if you don't get them in during the rest of this show, if you get them in later, we'll read them on the air next week. Arlette will come in and we'll have a chat about it. Here with me in the studio, I've got Florian Hoefner and Dylan Maddix from Memorial University School of Music. Susan Evoy is here, music teacher at Waterford Valley High and St. Teresa's Elementary. And Jo Dashney, music and performer, and also music student at Memorial University. What's it like? We talked about the connecting bit, right, for getting folks to connect with music. And perhaps at the university level or at the master's level, like you've moved, you're dealing with folks who have connected, right? Now, Susan, your bit, you're trying to help introduce folks perhaps more to music. But in your experience, in your careers, what's it like getting people to kind of get over, if there's a little bit of a barrier? How do you kind of, at any level, how do you help push or guide people through that to connect further in where they're going with it? Like, what kind of thought process is there to that?
I think, I don't think I know. That's my research. So my research is centered around servant leadership and how that comes across on the podium and off. And a big part of that is to create a space in which people can do exactly what you're talking about and have time and comfort to a certain extent, but also pressure to push themselves. So even on Wednesday, and like Jo was in the room for that, I spend the first 10 minutes of the first semester, we talk about like creating a culture that we all agree to buy into. And it's kind of called a circle of safety is what I call it.
Oh, right.
So if you don't want to be part of that circle of safety, there's a door.
Yeah.
But in at least I can speak for our rehearsals and the wind ensemble, it's really important for me that every student, no matter their level, has time and space and can feel like they can be themselves in that room, and they can put all the crap that happens in life at the door.
Yeah.
But when they come into this magical space twice a week, anything's possible. So I find to help students get to that next level, for me, foundationally, it starts at creating a space that we are supportive of each other. Yeah, there's the pressure of performing to the highest standards that you can, whatever that is, but allowing that space to exist so everyone can grow.
It sounds a bit like there's also, because you talk about that space, right? The permission might be the wrong word, but you have space where folks can be musically vulnerable too, right? Which seems like it would be really important.
Yeah, I mean, it's a scary thing to, have a new piece of music in front of you that maybe or maybe not, you didn't look at it before rehearsal. Who knows? And then we go, and you have to make a sound, otherwise we'll notice.
Yeah, because it's kind of the point.
Yeah. So, but helping, I try to create a lower pressure environment for people to have a willingness to take risks. Because once again, this is something that no matter what happens to, at least at the university level, you get a music degree, you might not go into music, you might be going to someone else, into some other career. But this idea of having to take a risk, to make choices, to go through fears is something that comes back again and again throughout our lives in different aspects.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
It takes guts to show up.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of guts to show up. And I think meeting students where they are, but also giving them an opportunity, like you said, Dylan, to push themselves and achieve. If you just give them kind of like the low-hanging fruit, then they're never going to get better, and they're never going to see themselves, what they can do and accomplish with others.
That's right, yeah. I like to pick rather challenging repertoire, also for myself, because that's things I'm excited about. Usually they tend to be a bit more on the challenging side. I like to play professional charts rather than educational charts that are a little bit easier. And it's really amazing what the students can do if they buy in, if they share the excitement about the music, and if they really realize that it's all about the ensemble, about listening to each other, right? I use the analogy sometimes when you see a junior soccer team with like 6-year-olds, everyone is running after the ball. And if you see a pro team, everyone has their roles and they play together to do these amazing moves that land them a goal. And that's sort of where you have to get in ensemble. At the first rehearsal, it's more like everyone is running after the ball. Everyone is playing their part, without ears for the others necessarily. Everyone's playing their parts, but you have these individual wind parts and they have to form chords. There's relationships between different sections. And so I find that my job as the conductor in the ensemble is to open their ears to discover these connections in the music. And so often it's not about the individual people not having practiced their parts, right? Everyone comes in and can play their parts at a pretty good level.
Yeah.
So that also takes the fear away that someone can't do it. You can show the students that by opening your ears and discovering these connections, that's how the ensemble starts sounding better, right? It's not about you not having the technique or the facility. It's about opening up your human skills for communication and interaction, and that's what makes the ensemble better.
Susan, Joe, any other thoughts?
Yeah, so just with what you were saying, like there's always a way to not demand, but to expect and to show like a high standard and level of excellence and attention to detail without making your students afraid of making mistakes. And I think that a lot of music students do have that fear of like, oh, I'm going to mess up at ensemble or I'm going to mess up during the concert. But just the mindset, that mindset of like your audience is going to be listening for you to mess up is just so not true. Like even in the most professional settings, your audience is there to have a good time. They're there to enjoy your music. And when you're focused on that, on the imagination of the music, connecting with your audience, connecting with each other, and you're not focused on, I have to get this right, I have to do this, I have to do that, that's what makes a good ensemble.
Everyone's there to watch you succeed and want you to
Absolutely,
succeed for
yeah.
that, right? That's the point, right? They're there and just wanting like the best for everyone, right? What, Susan, your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I would agree. I've had students who are like, I'm so afraid to make a mistake. I'm like, well, let's make a mistake. Let's make a mistake and learn from it.
Yeah,
And then
mistakes
we're going
are
to, and sometimes, you make a mistake and you're like, that sounded, I like where you're going with that. I like the volume. So you can always find something positive to reinforce them and then also give students something to work towards.
Yeah, and you have to make mistakes to
have
to
to
get
make
better.
mistakes,
You have
yeah.
to make mistakes, and so the ensemble, it has to be a safe place where you're allowed to play some truly awful sounding stuff if you like it's not about getting it right at the end of the day. It's about taking a risk. It's about putting yourself out there, being vulnerable. And if there's a mistake, even if there's a mistake at the show, like, who cares, right? I don't know. Like,
It's sometimes interesting to see how resilient students can be if something starts going off the rails and I'm like, how are we getting back here? And they're like, we're going to do this. And somehow it ends up landing on their feet. You know what I mean?
That's a very important skill to learn.
Sometimes it doesn't. I had a very small grade 6 string group. I was newly at St. Teresa's, and we had to perform for the Rotary Music Festival, except they used to do nighttime concerts. And they would be at the Holy Heart Theater. So they had their concert before the clinic. And it happened to be a very large night. The auditorium was full. There's a few big schools there. And a large band had gone on before my very small little string group. So we come out. We have 6 little chairs. The big curtain goes up. Auditorium, lights.
I'm filled with anxiety right
my
now, by the
little
way.
violinists are poised to play. I turn around, everyone's applauding. I put the baton down to start. Nothing. They are just trembling. They're holding the bows, and I'm whispering, play something. And they say, we can't. And then after a minute, it was like a John Cage piece, just silence. I put my hands down, I turned around. People still applauded. Everybody in the auditorium applauded. The curtain came down. And then the next day, they were like, oh my God, we were too afraid to play. But when we went to our clinic for the adjudicators, then they were prepared. So they had learned, albeit on a very public stage, what it's like to have a bit of performance anxiety. And then when they did the clinic, they did terrific.
And remind us how old they were.
They were like 12.
That's
So
a really,
good for them.
That's a really good point, though.
Good for them.
That's so good.
Performing and practicing performing is a really, really good way to have a low stakes situation where you are experiencing that pressure and just being able to get in tune with what's happening in your head in that situation. As a student, it's going to help you later on in your life when you are really experiencing some anxiety, and you can kind of go back to that point and say, like, I'm actually safe right now. Everything's okay. Like, can take a step back and then come back into it.
Yeah.
For me, it's
100%.
like thinking, well, I didn't die there, and that was horrible, but I didn't die. And for the next time something happens, it's like, you know what? That was way worse, and this is manageable. Right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I could see it. So much foundational, easy, like those types of life experiences, right?
And
Just
that
like much.
bonded us.
Yeah.
We had such a laugh about that.
Well,
after. Like
they'll
we
feel
were bonded forever. Like
so much closer to you because of that.
yeah,
and
remember
each
that
other.
scary time.
Remember that when we were in that together when none of us could play, and Miss was like, "Play anything," and we couldn't.
Yeah.
When did you start to notice that you could see a range of potential for people? Like I find, like I've been doing this gig now for a little while as a journalist, and we'll see younger folks come in now and like around 20, 21, 22 years old, and it's, I don't know, last couple of years somehow I started to be like, I see something, I see potential, and I see this range. I know where you can be with a little bit of extra work, and that took a bit for me professionally. What about with you folks as you developed as either for musicians or as instructors and teachers of looking and then getting that good feeling of like, oh yes, I can see there's so much more that we can develop here together, albeit maybe small or big.
I think for me, like as a student, I mean, I'll go I'll open wide here.
Sure, this is what it's all about.
I was born with a heart condition called aortic stenosis.
Yeah.
So I was allowed to play sports up until a certain grade, but my parents were worried the gym teacher, whoever, would push me too hard.
Yeah.
So then that's why I joined band, and I was just lucky to have found my thing right away. You know when you find your thing. And for me, I didn't know at the time, but my junior high band teacher, Peter Gallant, in Summerside, Prince Edward Island, he saw something. I had a good sound or something, and he pushed that, and he invested in me. My high school teacher invested in me. When I ended up going to university, same thing. And along the lines, I've been incredibly lucky to have amazing educators at every single level who see something in a student. And then as that now comes on to me as a teacher, I won't speak about the institution that I previously taught at, but it was a very small school. Often students coming from very different backgrounds in Northern Ontario. They never had lessons. They come from these really small towns. And they struggled academically and things, but in ensemble, that was one of those moments where they had time to figure out who they are and what this is all about. And some of those students that were talked about in very negative ways by some of my colleagues are now graduating from Laurier or Western or U of T, and they are doing work in the world that is actually really making an impact. And those were students that no one believed in. And I find that in large ensembles especially, it provides an opportunity for people to find what they love and to have that spark light something else, the opportunity to talk about your why and why we even do music, and how that might change for you throughout your progress.
Yeah, and to be there for folks who are kind of pushed aside or not listened to is it's quite the thing.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
I think it's not only formal concert band programs or jazz band programs we have in school. Nothing pleases me more because I'm a musician as well, and sometimes I'll be downtown at a show to see my former students who were doing their own shows at the bars. I get so excited. I've gone to see a lot of shows with my students, and I just think that's great. I did try to convince some of my students to not go to university right away, buy a little beater car, and go on tour. I was like, you're not tearing the engineering building down. Shout out to the Norm. But yeah, I think it's so great. So if students can get that spark in school, and like I said, it doesn't have to be a formal setting. It could be a rock band style. It could be like something else in choral. But when they get up for open mics, whenever you see them out there doing gigs and stuff, I think that pleases me so much.
Yeah. Joe, any thoughts?
Yeah, not like seeing the potential in yourself is also something that can happen in large ensembles too. Like,
wow. Yeah.
You can go into the semester, you can go into the band thinking like, well, I'm not going to be able to do this, but it really teaches you the value of putting some work in, putting some effort in, and when you play at the concert and things go well, it's just like really rewarding for your self-confidence. It builds your confidence in yourself, and it lets you see your own potential. That's important as well.
Yeah, Florian?
Yeah, I really think the ensemble is able to show students that potential, right? If they see this piece at the beginning of a semester and think, wow, how are we going to play this? And then they're going to do it at the end. And I've made this experience one semester where I thought, it's lots of first years in there, a lot of younger students. I'll take it a bit easier on the program. So, I picked quite a few pieces that were, the whole program was quite a lower level than I had done before. And in the surveys at the end, I found that the student satisfaction went down a little bit, that people commented that the pieces were too easy. And, so I think this engagement with the challenge and the experience of making it together as an ensemble to conquer this piece and make it sound good, that's such an important discovery to make for a student to start believing in their own skill and ability.
Is there a process of getting folks to listen back to where they were compared to where they are? Like how often does that happen? And what's that like?
I do it often. So basically every semester, I record every rehearsal.
Oh wow!
Even even yesterday was recorded, and it's like,
okay, everyone.
Yep. But then there's this moment at the end of the semester when we're getting really close to the concert, where besides being in a large ensemble, they have theory classes, they have non-music classes, they have life, and the morale kind of comes down. So that's usually around the time I play the first rehearsal recording. I'm like, I found this really great recording, and I'd love to play it for you. So we play it, and it's like horrible. I'm like, hey, just so you know, that was you. Yeah, and like listen to how far we've come now. And most of the time, it's like, what, really? Yeah. And it is this amazing moment. If I can jump back really quickly to this idea of seeing potential, because we're very much talking from an individual aspect or from the educator's perspective. But what's most beautiful is whenever students see potential within each other.
Oh, wow.
And I have one of my favorite moments last semester, as we've already talked about, students come in at different levels. And you can see the fear of God in their eyes when the first rehearsal starts and the piece is going da 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 like super fast, and they have no idea where they are. But rehearsal by rehearsal, that helps. And in certain sections, visibly see them helping each other. Someone who might not have had lessons, maybe has not played in a big ensemble like this, the section really huddles around them, helps them get through that. And because the section saw potential in them, they see potential within themselves also. So there's this beautiful community that comes in fostering it. And we're all lucky just to be maybe a beacon of that. But it's this idea that my job is to work myself out of a job. I want my musicians to become autonomous and to be able to make these choices and to support each other and to teach each other. So to see it in real life is like, that's one of the things that makes my eyes water every day.
So is there competition as well? Like I know, like on the journalism side of things, we see folks support each other, but historically in my industry, sometimes like people could have called it, depending on where you work, a little bit of cutthroat, depending on who. Like here, Newfoundland, Labrador, a bit different, but I'm aware of it. What's it like in your necks of the woods for this? Because there's support, but there's also competition.
Yeah.
Well, I find that there's very little competition that I'm experiencing here. Like it's really amazing. The students come in, it's a course, it's got a course number, they get grades, they step in this room and it becomes an ensemble. Like all goes in the background, and they're just so supportive, the students. When someone does something well, the band applauds for them, they're happy if someone does well. So I don't really notice that much here. From my own experience, I went to Manhattan School of Music in New York City. There was quite a bit of competition, absolutely, for just to get in the ensemble for the piano chair and the highest big band. Lots of competition. Once you're in there, people compete for solo spots and whatnot. Definitely, but I think it's beautiful that it's
nice. Is it healthy?
In its own way.
In its own way.
Sometimes,
but it's not something I would want to encourage here, and I'm just so happy about the supportive atmosphere we have here at the School of Music, and I bet at the high schools it's probably similar that we find pretty supportive.
Yeah, at my high school we don't have any auditioned ensembles. We haven't had to. Some students have an idea. They're like, can we have this kind of ensemble? We have our glee club for the first time this year because it was the students' idea, and exactly the right amount of people showed up for it. And now we have a glee club.
Cool.
So I guess there is a bit of competition in some other schools if you have some auditioned ensembles. As far as I can tell, you can audition, and if you don't get in one year, maybe you get some feedback and you audition and maybe you're successful the next year. But either way, even that is kind of a supportive thing where students are pushed to excel and like kind of go beyond where they thought they could.
Yeah, with auditions, the point that I'm at right now, I've taken a couple of professional orchestra auditions, and unfortunately, like the reality of being a professional orchestra musician is that you literally have to compete with people for your job.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Like there is one, for bass trombone, there's one position, and it's like a job that, you're making a living from. So you have 10 people all in the same building that are all playing to get this job that they're going to have for who knows how long. So it can be a very, very nerve-wracking experience to go in there and still have to present your best self. But definitely having this background of being in a supportive community for when you're learning music and when you're playing together, it really helps you get over that. If you don't have that support and you don't feel it until like when you're auditioning, it's going to be way harder. You don't feel like you have a community to fall back on. So yeah, it really is the reality though. Like you do have to compete at some point if you want, but fortunately, though, music isn't all professional jobs. Like that's not the reality. So it's important to have space for both of those environments.
All right, we're out of time. Nate, do you got that music from the start? No theme today. We'll go out on this. Jo Dashney, Susan Evoy, Dylan Maddix, and Florian Hoefner, thank you so much for this conversation. One final 2-second shout out or a 3-second shout out about love of music, benefit of music. Go.
Oh my goodness. It'll change your life. It's great.
Perfect.
Excitement.
Bring people together.
Art for art's sake, music for music's sake.
All right, folks. Thank you so much. That is it for the show today. That's it for this week. Coming up on Monday, we talk internet history, tech growth, how it has changed the world around us, and my guest will also tell you why he thinks Facebook is a social cancer. That's Monday. Don't miss the show.